I had a client of mine. He's a life insurance client of mine. He came into, we had a meeting the other day, and one of the things that was concerning to him was he started in the government about 31 years ago. He was 31 years federal employee. When he got into the government, one of the first things he did was one of his supervisors set him down and said, "Look," his name was Greg. He said, "Greg, thing you have to do when you since you're working in the federal government now, you're young, it's probably going to be easy for you not to save your money, but what you need to do is you need to at least put 5% of your money into your TSP, and then every year after that, you want to make sure you increase about 1%." Classic advice, right? Put your money, he told him to put his money in the C fund and just let it grow, right? 30 years of him doing that, now he's sitting at $1.4 million, right? But the thing that Greg did not understand was the tax implications of Roth TSP, the traditional TSP. He put his money in the traditional TSP, thought he was doing a good job, watched his money continue to grow up and down markets. He didn't change it. He just kept contributing, doing the right thing, right? Doing the right thing. Now he's sitting at retirement, $1.4 million, has all these goals. Me and him were going over all the goals. And so I brought up taxes to him. And I said, well, let me ask you this, Greg. And I even asked you all on the call. How much of this money is yours? You've done a good job saving, but how much of it is yours? He's like, man, it's 1.4 million, all of it, all of his mine, right? But what he didn't understand is that that's not actually the case, right? What's actually the case is that a portion of that money is going to the IRS. The difference, and also the part that he didn't understand, and I also totally didn't understand, is that we don't know how much of that money is his either, right? It all depends on when he takes that money out. And so as we're going through that conversation, the thing he asked me, he's like, "Well, what could I have done? Because I want to educate my sons, right? His sons one's in the military, one's in the federal government, right?" And he said, "Look, I want to educate them on what the different options are." And that led me to the title of this webinar tonight. Now, we talk about taxes all the time, but what I want to talk to you about tonight, and what I talked to Greg about that day on the call, was what are the options, right? Because there's a lot of options that you could do, but as you're working, there are a lot of options that you have as federal employees, even people that have spouses that are in the private sector. There are different options that you have, and I want to talk to you all tonight about what those options are, just like I talked to Greg about, right? And so tonight we're going to talk about what those different vehicles are, and how, if you're in a position where you're saving, you got things on autopilot, what are your options, right? And what should you do based on where you are, right? We're going to talk about that tonight, right? So when it comes to your retirement plans, right, and your retirement accounts, your TSP, you have your traditional TSP, you have your Roth TSP that's new as of 2012, right? Relatively new, right? If you've been in the government for over 20 years, that's considered new, right? 12, that started in 2012, where you can contribute, to your Roth TSP, which is they take the taxes now, and you don't have to pay tax in the future. We talk about that all the time. You also have your traditional TSP as well, right? All of them are different. You have your traditional IRA, you have your Roth IRA, you have your brokerage account, which is your stocks and things like that, and they all fall into three different categories, right? One is the tax now, right? The tax now category is when you have stocks and CDs and mutual funds and things like that. So with those, if you own any of those, and you're doing your taxes on an annual basis, one of the first things your accountant's going to ask you is, well, send me your brokerage account statements, right? Because you get a 1099 from those on an annual basis, right? And so you're going to have to send those over to him or her, and you have to pay taxes on those as you go along, right? And if you withdraw money from you have to pay capital gains. Now, capital gains taxes are less, but than earned income tax, but you still have to pay tax on those as you go along. Not a bad option, but you don't get some of the tax benefits that we'll talk about in the other two buckets. But that is a bucket, right? So I explained that to Greg because his sons are young. So his sons were like, well, I want to put a bunch of money in stocks. Not a bad idea, but as we talk through it, he was able to see, like, you know what? No, I need to tell my sons to max out their TSPs, because their TSPs gives them a couple, whether it's Roth or traditional, gives them some tax benefits that you just can't get in the brokerage accounts. Also, another thing about the brokerage accounts is the money's liquid. You could take the money out as you need to, right? That's another thing with the brokerage accounts. Then you have your tax late, your tax later. Your tax later are your traditional TSP, right? Your original TSP, and anybody that's experienced with the TSP, you know that if let's say you make 100,000, you put 20% in the TSP. I mean, you put 20% in 20% in your TSP. Your taxable income is going to drop down to say $80,000, right? Because it's 20,000, 20% is going to drop down 80,000. You're taxed on 80,000. That has some tax benefits, especially if you're on the border of a tax bracket, right? That helps you out a lot. You pay a lot less in taxes. It can help with a variety of things like, your kids going to student loans, qualifying for different things. If your taxes are lower, you get taxed at a different tax bracket sometimes or lower tax amount. That can be beneficial, right? Again, when it comes to you personally, you obviously want to consult with an accountant or somebody like that. That way they can support you in making sure you make that right decision. But that is how it works with your traditional TSP. Then you have a traditional IRA. Your traditional IRA, there's a cap on how much you can put into it, but there's a nuance if you roll money into it, right? That's where you call your rollover IRA, where there's no cap on how much you can put into it, but it has to come from a rollover IRA, right? So, people retire, they want to move their money outside of TSP, but don't want to pay the taxes on that transfer. Then they can roll, $100,000 into the Roth IRA, rollover IRA, and there's no tax penalties. It's just a rollover, right? Because some IRAs have a lot more flexibility than TSP. But while you're working, though, quick point, while you're working, you cannot do that. You cannot do that until you're 59 and a half or you retire, right? You have to keep your money in the TSP, traditional TSP, while you're working. You can't move money to a qualified account while you're working, but you can do that once you reach those milestones, or you can start up one on the side on the outside. But there's going to be a cap on how much you can put into it. But when you put money into a traditional IRA, you lower your taxes, right? And so I explained that. I explained that to Greg, and he was like, "Okay, but that's the bucket that he had been living in his entire existence." But the difference is like that's one reason why it's called tax later is because when you do that, you defer the taxes, right? And so then we have the Roth TSP and the Roth IRA. Now it says tax never, but you pay a small tax up front, so you do get taxed, but it's a small tax, right? And so it's based on your taxable income. But the issue with that is the good thing about that is as it grows, and we call it the seed taxing the seed versus the harvest. So the good thing about that is you might be getting taxed a couple $100s a pay period, right? But then let's look at Greg. Greg with 1.4 million. That 1.4 million, if he had a lot of that in Roth, he wouldn't be paying taxes on that money. I mention this client all the time who's retiring this year, and he had a similar amount. He had about 1.1 million in his, but of his 1.1 million, he had about 800,000 that was in his Roth TSP. And because of that, this Christmas he's going to hand out, big checks to all his kids to pay off their student loans, right? And each one is like 60,000 or something, like 60 at the minimum, right? They're a little bit, some are higher, but the lowest one was 60,000. But he's going to hand out checks to his kids to pay off student loans, and he doesn't have to worry about the tax penalties on that at all. All that money's in the Roth, so he's good. He has peace of mind. He can go on his TSP when he needs to, right? So that's the example of the power of the Roth because that money, every pay period he's putting money in. Now that money's at 800,000, tax free, no questions asked. Right. As soon as 2012 hit, he moved all his contributions to the Roth TSP and just been contributing on it since, which was a smart move, right? Just a smart move at the time, and it's paid off to him. And so this breaks them down. I went through these already. Traditional TSP lowers your taxable income today, but you pay ordinary income tax later. You know, and so again with the traditional TSP, you can roll it over to traditional IRA. You can't move your traditional. You can move your traditional TSP into a Roth IRA, but anytime you move something, and let me put it like this: anytime you have what's called a traditional TSP and traditional IRAs are what's called qualified money. So if you ever hear the term, is it qualified or non-qualified? Qualified money is money that has not been taxed yet. Anytime you take money that's qualified and move it outside of the qualified bucket, there's a tax. You have to pay taxes anytime you do that. So if you take money from your traditional TSP and you want to move it into some personal stocks, you're going to pay taxes when you do it. If you take traditional TSP money and you want to move it to a Roth IRA, a rollover Roth IRA, you're going to pay taxes on any time you do that. Anytime, it's like a fence. Anytime you exit that fence, there's a toll you got to pay. Right now, with the Roth IRA, with the Roth account, there aren't any taxes. So if you want to move money and you're over 59 and a half, if you want to move money from a Roth account into a brokerage account, there's no tax penalties there because the taxes are already paid, right? And so that's why Roth IRAs are very important, right? And so real quick on the traditional IRA, because people ask about this all the time, is like, well, can I do an IRA outside the job? Yes, but there's limits, right? And as of this year, is a $7,000 limit, right? So that's how that goes. If you already maxed out your TSP and you want to do extra money, you could do it, but then there's a limit. And then there's income restrictions and stuff like that. We won't go through all that right now. If you want to book a call, you want to talk about it one-on-one, we can. But I just want to present the information, present the options. Then you have your rollover IRA. Now, with the rollover IRA, like I mentioned earlier, there's no limits on the contribution because you can move 150,000, 200, 300,000 into a rollover IRA, right? And so there's no limits on what you can put in it as long as it's a rollover, though. You can't just have 300,000 sitting aside in a brokerage account, and all of a sudden you want to throw it into an IRA. You can't do that, and the reason why you can't do that is because the amount of tax deductions that will the IRS doesn't want you to get that level of a $300,000 write off, right? So that's why they won't let you do it, right? And so you know, um, oh, and so Roth IRA, same type of limits, right? Roth IRA, you can have it, you can put money into it, you know, but there's still a limit on what you can do, right? And here go the income limits. The good thing about a Roth IRA is there's no RMDs, which are requirement minimum distributions that we talk about all the time. They used to be 72, but because of the Secure Act, now they're 74. And so a Roth IRA is good because you get the same tax deferred status. Because here's the good thing about IRAs in general is that you're not taxed on the gains that you make within the account, right? That's a huge thing. On a 1099, you're taxed on the gains that you're making. If you have a stock account and the money's growing, you get taxed on those, right? In a Roth IRA, traditional IRA, those taxes are taxed differently, which works in your favor. And that's why they have those 59 and a half limits on them because they want you to be able to save the money, right? Uh, and so here's how the taxable accounts work, and these are like your individual stocks that you own, your Robinhoods of the world, your Fidelity accounts, just E-Trade, whatever you use to buy stocks and stuff like that. There's no contribution limits. They're fully liquid. I mean, you just got to sell the asset, but you're taxed every year. Gains increase taxable income, and just less efficient over the long term because the taxes are coming out every year. When you don't have taxes coming out on an annual basis, it allows the money to compound faster, and that's the benefit of an IRA, right? And so but there's nothing wrong with it if you already maxed out your IRAs and you're looking for places to put money. There's no discourage. Don't be discouraged and not do this. I have stocks. You want to be able to save money in an efficient way for yourself if you can, right? But don't sacrifice what you're putting into your TSP just to buy stocks from the side thinking you're doing better. And depending on how you've invested, I mean, you can. I mean, if you bought Apple stock and then when it was low and then now it's through the roof, obviously you're better off. But if you're not an experienced investor, you just invest in index funds or just mutual funds on your own, the TSP is not a bad place. And you find people, and I run into people all the time that say, well, somebody, I was talking to someone and they told me to, not invest in my TSP above the match, but invest in stocks after that. A lot of times people are just trying to sell you stuff, and so it benefits them if you believe that. But, I've been doing this now for 16 years, and the people I've seen that just diligently invest in their TSP, invest in the C S&I fund, and just set it and forget it. Don't touch it. Don't think about it. Continue to increase as they can. They're not complaining. They're those people. I was talking to a lady yesterday, and literally, she was sitting there. She's like, I can't believe I have this much money, and what do I do with it? Because she had no kids, and we were really going through her finances, and she had a dream car. She wanted to buy a Range Rover Autobiography, and the card on it was about 2,100. And as we're going through it, I'm just like, yeah, like you can afford this pretty easily. And the reason why is because she she saved her money, right? She had about 900,000, in her TSP, no kids, little to no debt, and it's just like, yeah, like if that's the car you want, you can easily afford this because you've invested well, and now is the time for you to treat yourself. And she just couldn't wrap her mind around it. But I'm saying all that to say is that if you follow the rules of increasing your TSP by 1% a year minimum, every time you get every time you get a cost of living increase, invest your money properly within the TSP. Don't panic when things go crazy, but just stay the course. You will be okay, right? So when you hear people say, "Take your money out," don't invest above the 5%. Put your money into a whole life policy that has cash value, and make that that's a safer investment than your TSP. Raise a side out of those type of people, unless they can show you a comparison of what that looks like versus your TSP, and it's very clear. But like I said, I've been doing this 16 years. We sell a lot of life insurance policies. It doesn't come close to what you would get in your TSP invested correctly, whether it's traditional TSP or Roth TSP. They both will beat it. And so, make sure you question people and make them build out a retirement profile for you. And when you do that, then you can dissect it and make sure that what they're saying makes sense. And if they don't do that, then I would say ask more questions to somebody else. But here's the side by side comparison of everything. The TSP, obviously, you have your TSP limits, which we all know, and those TSP limits also apply to the Roth TSP. The Roth TSP and the traditional TSP both have the same contribution limits, right? Which is very important because people always get confused and think the Roth TSP has the same limits as the Roth IRA outside. No, they don't. You could put up the if you're above the age of 50, you can put over 30,000 into your Roth TSP, which is significant. And that's what the client of mine that I'll tell you about that had 800. That's what he did. He invested well, maxed out his TSP, and his Roth TSP, and he's reaping the benefits of it. And so you want to make sure you do that, and yeah, so that's how that works. What I want to do now is we got 10 minutes. I want to answer any questions that are out there because sometimes we run over and we don't have time for questions. So I want to make sure I get those. So this is what I went over with Greg. I went over with him, explained it to his sons. Hopefully, this is helpful to you as it was to him. Helena, can you roll over traditional TSP money to outside Roth IRA? Is the process same as the Roth TSP? So Alina, you can. Well, Alina, real quick, what's your age? Actually, then I can answer it better once I know that. Okay, so for you, you can't. And are you still working, Alina? Are you still working, or are you retired? Once you tell me that, then I can fully answer the question. Okay. All right. So Helena says, can you roll over traditional TSP money to outside Roth IRA? Question mark. And is the process the same as Roth TSP? Okay. You cannot, until you turn 59 and a half, you cannot roll traditional TSP money to an outside Roth IRA. The reason being is the TSP has, it's the IRS rule. IRS rule has any 401k. TSP is considered a 401k according to the tax law, right? And so you can't roll any money until you're 59 and a half if you're working to any outside account, right? But once you retire, Helena, um, but you had to once you turn 55 and you're retired, you can then roll money to an outside Roth IRA. But when you do that, you have to be careful because when you do it, Just like if you roll traditional TSP to a Roth TSP, again, that's going from qualified to non-qualified. There's going to be a tax penalty, not penalty, but you're going to pay taxes. So let's say if you do 100,000, right? If you do 100,000, then that 100,000 is going to be taxed as income to you. Okay. So what we do with clients is we look at your tax returns, and we run a report based on our retirement analyzer system, and we look at where you are tax wise and look at your tax bracket, and then from there we make a decision on, okay, you have $60,000 left in this tax bracket, right, Helena? And then we'll say, okay, so let's roll 40,000 to a Roth IRA so that you're not paying any more taxes than you're already paying. And so we make the decision based on that. That way it's systematic, and that way you're not triggering bigger tax things. Because what you don't want to do is roll your money into a Roth IRA, just doing it because you feel like it, and then all of a sudden you triggered another tax bracket, and now you're paying all these extra taxes when you could have paid less, and gotten the same impact just over time, right? And so you just want to have a strategy when you start moving money into a Roth IRA. And when you retire, you have more options open to you. But as of right now, you can't. Well, September's in 2 months, but we can have that conversation when you're ready. And then rollover IRA never taxed. What is it not taxed? So that's what I'm saying. When it's never the terms are some that people use is sometimes never taxed. It is taxed when you put the money in it, but usually the tax is a lot smaller than what it will be when it grows, right? And so we use the term, Melinda, tax the seed, not the harvest. It's a minimal tax, but when it grows, it's almost it pales in comparison of what it would have been when you if you would have just let the money delay, and then pay that big tax at the end. And then Deidre, what are your takes on annuities? My takes on annuities is this: you have to use annuities. I have a couple of takes on annuities. The first take is annuities have to be a part of a larger system, right? Structure. So we use annuities for people that say they want to keep money in the G fund because they just want money that's protected, right? The annuities that we use, and I'll get into what I mean by we use in a minute. The annuities that we use are average anywhere between 6 to 9% return, right? And so when you compare that to a G fund that's getting 2.5% max, I think the last 10 years is at 2.45. It's a little under 2.5%. When inflation is at 3.27 average, but then in the last couple of years, we've been around between 4 to 6. The annuity beats the G fund protection. So we use it for those reasons. All right, if you want protected money, then we're going to put this money right here in an annuity, but then we're going to put the rest of your money into the C fund. So that way you have a growth bucket and you have a protected bucket. The protected bucket is the annuity. The growth bucket is the TSP, right? And when you have those two combined, you're no longer afraid when the market drops because you have your protected money. And I've went over this before. We use a financial house framework. Your protected money that you want for income, long-term care, uh, leaving money to your spouse or whatever, that money is in the annuity, right? And we get to that together so that if there's ever an emergency, if there's ever a market crash, that the money that protects those closest to you, protects your income, is all in that protected status. But everything else we want in the market, because if you look at the last 2 years, 2020, 2023, the market was at 26%. In 2025, 2024, the market was at 24%. And this year so far, the market's been around 5.5%, right? So we don't want to miss out on those gains. When the years are like that, we want to make sure we're capturing that money and we're getting it. And so we leave that money in the protected bucket and we put the other money in annuities. The problem with annuities, why annuities get a bad rap, is because a lot of advisors come in and they try to take all of your money out of your TSP and put it in annuities. That's not a good idea, because you miss out on all the upside of the market that you could get with the C fund and the TSP and things like that. And so you have to have them structured. Another point on annuities is when you're dealing with people that have annuities, if people start promising you like bonuses and things like that, you want to kind of take a step back from those type of annuities, because those type of annuities, they give you a lot of money up front, but in the long run, they don't make as much, right? And so when you're dealing with annuities, you really want to sit down with somebody that looks at your overall picture and gives you advice from there, not just selling annuities. And most people I come across, they're just selling annuities, trying to get you all your money out of your TSP and into an annuity. That's not a good idea. Annuities overall is a part of an overall structure. And if a person's not doing that, then I wouldn't do it. Uh, Sarah says, when can I collect the money from a Roth IRA without being taxed? I'm 53 and I have had it for 24 years. So you have to wait till 59 and a half, Sarah, before you can take that money out tax free. But the good thing is it's been growing, and when you take it out, it's all yours. You don't owe anybody anything for it, and there'll never be any RMDs or anything like that on it, which is good. And you can still contribute to it too, which is good too. So congratulations on that. Hope to answer your question. And Deidre, did I answer your question too on annuities? Have the TSP life cycle funds been beneficial? As I've never used it in 2.5 years from. So yeah, so the TSP life cycle funds are great. They're good. They're good. If you're the type of person that wants to, you just want a diversified account. Yeah, they're good. Some people are like, I want to be CNS fund and just keep it moving. Yeah. The thing about the life cycle funds is they can tend to be overly conservative. And I've talked about this before. When when investors are creating funds, a lot of times they create them for the population at large, right? When you watch TV and you're seeing people give advice, they're normally talking about everybody, right? Your cousins, people that don't have pensions mainly. And as federal employees, your retirement is going to look a lot different. So when your cousins retire, your neighbors retire, they have a 401k. That 401k is everything. It's a lifeblood of their retirement. If they need a family emergency, they're going to that 401k. They're taking expensive vacations, they're going to that 401k. They have a health issue, they're going to that 401k. With 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 federal employees, it's very different. And I do a lot of these retirement one-on-ones and families. And most federal employees, I would say 7 out of 10 federal employees, they only use their pension and their social security for income, and their TSP just sits. Or they just pinch from it a little bit, but they don't need it for day-to-day living. And so what do I mean by that when it comes to the life cycle funds? The life cycle funds tend to be very conservative, as if you need that money for income right now. And so that's my only pushback on the life cycle funds. They can be kind of conservative. And so when I see people that invest in TSP, quote unquote, aggressively, right, or with a plan that's unique to them, they have more growth than what you see in the life cycle fund over the long term, because they're not as conservative as the life cycle fund. Because once you get to the age in which you're ready to retire, the life cycle funds automatically put you into either the income fund or the fund that's like right now. So if you're retiring in 2.5 years, like you're saying, you're probably in the L 2030, and the L 2030 is probably very, very, very conservative. But you're not, and the reason why it says 2030 is because oftentimes it's that way because they're thinking you're gonna take income at 2030. From my experience, though, most other employees are not using the TSP as income, as a big source of income, and so therefore you can push that out some, because that's not really the first time you're going to use it consistently. Most federal employees start using their TSP when there's a major health issue, grandkids going to college, stuff like that. But usually that's like 10 years into retirement, and so it's just a little different. And so you just want to have a customized retirement plan. That'll help you gain a lot of clarity when it comes to the life cycle fund versus the regular individual funds. All right. Athea says, how soon can I get money out of my TSP without penalty? I recently retired. I'm 54. Athea, let's talk one on one, because the reason, here's why I'm saying that. If this was a year ago, I could tell you a clear cut answer to that. But now it's like agency by agency, and how they process your retirement. It's just very different right now. Like these times are just very different. And so let's talk one on one, and we could just get some clarity. And I could talk to you about how long you've been in the government, things like that. And then we could decide. I mean, not decide, but we can understand better when you can touch that money and how you can use it for your benefit in retirement, if that works for you. That'd be the best thing to do. Um, Now, if anybody else wants to talk, oh yeah, in 30 years, okay, yeah, we can talk about that. If anybody else wants to set up a call, you can go to fedlegacycall.com, or you could just put plan in the chat. If you put plan in the chat, my assistants know to reach out to you, and we'll set up a call. So yeah, if you want to book a call, just put plan in the chat, and what we'll do is we'll go through your TSP, we'll go through your Roth TSP, we'll help you understand how much you need to be putting in the Roth TSP, and really help you build out a retirement plan that can be on autopilot. Because once you get to retirement, you know it's kind of too late to start planning at that point. The earlier you do it, the better. But at any point, you just want to make sure you're starting the retirement process so that when you do get to retirement, you know, you have peace of mind. We constantly say, we want you to retire on time and with confidence. We say on time because when I first saw the Fed Legacy, I was seeing people work into their 70s just because they were afraid to retire. But a lot of times when we sat down, they just didn't have the information. They could have retired 5 years ago. They just didn't have the information and they were living in fear, right? So we want to make sure you retire on time so you can enjoy your life. And then we say we're with confidence because we want you to retire and not look back, right? We want you to be taking one of the gifts that we send out to people is we send out a travel book, like 1,000 ideas, around the world, and so we want you to go see things. We want you to enjoy your life. And that's what we mean by confidence. You don't want to look back. You're not nervous. And the way that you're not nervous or anything like that is you have an understanding of your whole financial picture, right? And that's what we do at Fed Legacy. And once you have that understanding of your whole financial picture, there's no surprises.